Okay, so let's get the workshop started by introducing today's presenter. Amanda Harvey-Sánchez is a Latina Toronto-based organizer, activist, researcher, and educator. The daughter of a climate scientist and a teacher, Amanda was called into the climate justice movement through working on her campus's fossil fuel divestment campaign at the University of Toronto in 2015. Since then, she's had the opportunity to take part in community-based and justice-focused campaigns across Canada, the US, India, and France. She's currently completing her PhD at the University of Toronto on the social and political life of youth climate justice organizing in Canada. Thanks so much for being with us today, Amanda, and pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that really warm and lovely introduction and for welcoming me to the For Our Kids Network. I'm really excited to be meeting you all today and hopefully getting to see more of your work in the future. I'll out myself and say that I totally stalked your website and YouTube channel and was already very blown away by a lot of what I've seen. So I'm just excited to be in this space with you together today. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about recruitment and retention, which is a pretty hot topic in a lot of activist spaces. But specifically, I'm going to be talking about recruitment and retention within the context of teams and campaigns, which I hope I will make a compelling case to you today are a big part of how we engage, retain, and build leadership in groups and chapters. So, a little bit about myself, beyond what Jinhua very nicely laid out. So I'm a millennial Gen Z on the cusp. I'd like to think that I'm kind of part of the generation that grew up already hearing about climate change. Climate change was starting to become mainstream by the time I was in middle school, high school. I remember Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, coming out, starting to learn about climate change a little bit in school, and having, I'm sure a lot of your own kids that a lot of big feelings about what is the climate crisis? What does this mean for my future as a young person? I was lucky that my dad happened to be a climate scientist and he could answer a lot of my questions, but they tended to be often very scientific or technocratic or mathematical type answers, and I didn't really feel at that point in my life like I had a lot of agency or a way that I could make a difference on this massive planetary global catastrophe that is the climate crisis. Until I started my undergrad at the University of Toronto and I found this campaign for fossil fuel divestment. So basically trying to get the largest university in Canada to divest its endowment fund from fossil fuel companies. And that campaign was really the first time in my life that climate change and climate action felt tangible. It felt focused. It didn't feel like this, I have to have the entire weight of the world on my shoulders at 18. It felt like there was a window where I could make a real difference as a student and as a young person. And that kind of informs why I see campaigns as a really important part of how we can increase people's agency, sense of empowerment, and action on climate change. So, oh, and I should note, the University of Toronto actually did divest its endowment fund about 9 years after I started working on that campaign, but a win did happen. So a bit, this is the overview of what we're going to be chatting about today. We'll start with a little bit of scene setting, what brings us here. Then I'm going to talk about what a campaign is and why campaigns win, and how campaigns differ from maybe some of the other types of things that grassroots groups take part in, like one-off actions, community service, etc. I'll chat a bit about how campaigns build capacity, specifically through teams. We We might take a little bit of a break after that, and then we'll go into theory of change, which is a big part of the early steps of designing a campaign, and then hopefully have some time for questions. So to get us started, I would love if folks could share in the chat or come off mute, and just share with all of us here, how did you find your way to For Our Kids? Or if you're from a different group, how you found your way to the group that you're currently organizing with, what sparked your interest in For Our Kids, and importantly, what makes you stay? Let me see.
Uh, so for me, I've been involved in some environmental action for a while as a teacher, but I left teaching and I felt like I needed some sort of like community to do that work in. And I got involved with some of the education through Talk Climate to Me, which was geared toward women predominantly. I did that kind of over the pandemic, and I had 2 kids, so now it just feels very urgent. We don't have a Winnipeg chapter currently, but I was hoping that if I learn about recruitment and retention, then I would kind of have some understanding of how to get things going here. Because I think right now it seems a little like I have no idea how to start. Like I talked with Genoa about some actions and campaigns, and it just kind of still feels a little bit yeah, not very tangible. So I think this might help make it tangible. Yeah, and I'm hoping that that will lead to something bigger, beyond just my individual or family actions that we've been doing.
Amazing. So I'm hearing like looking for a way to make a difference, looking for a community of like-minded people that you can connect with and talk to. Great. Anyone else want to share? Don't be shy. I see someone with a raised hand. Oh,
I have my hand up.
yeah, go ahead.
So I'm actually not here to join TARE, although, sorry, to join FOK. I'm actually a member of TARE, Toronto East Residents for Renewable Energy. But Corey, who's a member of your group, mentioned that you were having the talk this evening. I'm actually in 2 groups. I'm in TARE, which is a fairly small and new group, and also SCAN, Seniors for Climate Action Now, which is a much larger group. So the topic is of interest to me, especially around the smaller group. And I was thinking about this topic today and was thinking part of the reason that I've stayed interested is because it's a group that's been totally action-based from day one. And I think that's a really motivating factor to stay engaged with a group. But what sparked my interest in the first place, going back a couple of different organizations, is, unlike many of you, I'm a senior and I worry about the world that I'm leaving to the generations that follow, and looking for concrete things that I can do about it. That's what would make me stay.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And that's so lovely to hear you're part of several different community action groups. Marianne?
Yeah, so I found my way. I think For Our Kids found me through Lella. And then we had an amazing conversation. I had just been on mat leave with my first child, and although I'd always been environmentally focused, it found it a struggle to try to do that with a child. And so the actions for Our Kids just seemed so easy and approachable and able to be done that they really appealed to me. What makes me stay is a little bit of twofold. I really, really love it. But if I'm going to be truthful, I'm also a little afraid that we don't have enough volunteers, so that if I did leave, it might fall apart in Ottawa. So I'm looking here to really see how we can boost up that broad base and to keep it going strong.
Amazing. Okay. Anyone else want to share, or we? Oh, I see someone in the chat is saying, For Our Kids found me. I was a keyboard warrior on Twitter, and I think it was Tarlin that reached out to me initially, and I had a conversation with Lella about 6 months later, another mom and I decided to launch For Our Kids Alberta. I stay because it is an outlet for many of my emotions and because I realize that other Alberta parents, caregivers are very concerned. And together we have found our community. Being an environmentalist in Alberta is seen as anti-Albertan, but together we can push back. Okay, and I'm seeing lots of people liking this comment, so that sounds like a popular one. Yeah. Oh, Anne, you want to jump in too?
Oh, thanks, and great to be here and see everybody. I joined For Our Kids Toronto. I was in a different climate group, Climate Fast here in Toronto, but and I'd also been quite involved in helping organize the 2018-2019 climate strikes. And then when Brianne founded the Toronto group, I jumped ship over there. And I'm also the co-chair of the school board's environment committee. So that it seemed like organizing with parents seemed like a logical place to be. And like others have mentioned here, I'm really interested in doing what we can do to grow our group, but also recognizing that parents of all people are super stretched with jobs and kids, and I recognize those challenges. So trying to balance my own kind of like, oh my God, I've got to do things, with also really understanding that people's time and capacity is limited. So yeah, thanks for organizing the session. And also I had a great conversation with Lela, many conversations along the way. So Lela, you are a touchstone here. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Anne. Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing a mix of is that it's personal relationships are really important. You were maybe recruited by having a one-on-one conversation with someone. Maybe you're staying because you have a personal relationship with someone, you feel some accountability to them. Maybe you found a sense of community, so relationships being really important. Action and effectiveness being really important. No one wants to stay around in a group that just talks and talks and talks in circles and doesn't get anything done. So having a feeling that what you're doing is a good use of your time, it's making a difference. And maybe also a feeling of like ownership, like space to take action as a particular constituency, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a senior, responsibility from that kind of sense of identity. So those are the themes I would pull out from what you've all shared. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. So Jinwa and I have spoken a little bit leading up to, coming up with this session. So I got to hear a little bit from her about like just high level things where the different teams are at. And this is kind of what I've heard is going on in like For Our Kids chapters in different cities. I just wanted to kind of summarize and gauge if I've accurately assessed this. So I'm hearing that issues around distributed leadership come up. And then people feeling kind of like discouraged when you're unable to get enough volunteers to like sign up for a task or distribute the work more evenly. There's often a very passionate but very busy core group of people. Related to the point on distributed leadership, also leadership development, so developing new leaders to kind of take on some of the other work. And then all of the above contributing to like low capacity in the team or the chapter. So maybe give me a thumbs up in the chat if this sounds accurate, resonates with your experience. And if there's anything I've missed, feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay, seeing thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so keeping this in mind, our goal for today is really to think about and learn about campaigns as a capacity building tool, and why if you don't have a campaign, this might be killing your team's capacity. So without further ado, we're going to go into what is a campaign and why campaigns actually win. So let's just put our imagination hats on, although it's not too hard to imagine because it's the scenario I'm going to tell you about is actually probably going to happen this summer. So imagine that you are a high school student, a middle school student, or a parent of a high school student, middle school student. It's a couple months from now, it's September. This is the hottest September of your life so far, as Bart Simpson tells us. Recent news coverage is revealing a shocking number of people have died in your community because of heat-related causes. So maybe young children, elderly or senior people, disabled people in the community, and poor and working class communities without access to green spaces, natural tree cover, and cooling centers are dying or becoming severely ill at a disproportionate rate. So you're seeing this in the news, you're witnessing it in your own community. Maybe you've had a few conversations with people at school pickup or with your own kids, and you really feel that the school district in your community, they should open the doors for people who need relief from the heat. So that could be parents who worked out in the heat all day and then took crowded public transit to go and pick up their kid from school. Could be people in the neighborhood who don't have access to air conditioning. It could be kids who don't have a cool place to do their homework and who need a place to do their homework in the extreme heat. And you also want your school to join the movement for a Green New Deal by electrifying school buses, by buying local food for school lunches, by installing solar panels and heat pumps in all school buildings and infrastructure. So this is your plan. This is what you think this pretty dire situation requires. And you bring this proposal to the administration, and they refuse. They just straight up, nope, like can't do it, no can do. What do you do? Let's just brainstorm some ideas. Popcorn. There are no wrong answers.
Write op-eds in the local newspaper.
Okay, I'm gonna start writing these here as you guys speak.
Reach out to trustees who might be sympathetic. But I'm also aware that this will involve directing a lot of the campaign efforts around this at the Ministry of Education, because the school board can do some things, but they can't do other things. So reaching out to sympathetic trustees, reaching out to other parent organizations, reaching out to school groups. There are a number in Toronto that I can think of, and starting a call around this and getting people's ideas.
Okay. So you get media attention. Okay, let's say you have your trusty op-ed. You're maybe really lucky you got it published in a mainstream outlet like the Toronto Star. You had some good connections. You've directed it to the school administration. They still refuse. What's next?
You plan an event or an action that highlights the issues and the solutions.
Yeah, what would that look like? What kind of action? How would you highlight the issues?
You could stage something where a lot of people are in front of the school, very, very tired, very hot, representing heat stroke, and kind of saying, oh, if only there was a way that we could actually get cool air to these people.
Victim stories, the stories of those who've been impacted by this, who've lost family members, having a press conference or an event in which they could tell their story, I think could be a powerful way to get media attention.
Okay. Peggy has a hand, I think.
Yeah. Maybe if there's a parents association, and contact them about starting a petition, and then call the media.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's say we've got the petition. It's got 1,000 signatures. We've done a die-in action. They're still refusing. What's next? Monica?
I do a letter writing campaign, then a phone call campaign. So I was calling the school board
Yeah,
and
okay. So
emailing them.
phone banking the school board. Okay, anything else? Go door to door. I'm gonna write this one down from door to door conversations with other people in the community. Yeah, okay.
And maybe hosting an event that is like family kid friendly. So getting the kids and their families involved, and then like at the school level, and then maybe beyond just the school level, but other families in the community, other schools, to make it bigger.
Yeah, and who else could we get involved? We've got the families, we've got the kids. Who else might be some important allies here?
Politicians.
Teachers unions.
Teachers unions, yes. What could the teachers unions do? Health industry.
I'm not sure when their next contract negotiations would be, but I was so inspired by what I saw happening in Chicago, in which the teachers unions demanded as part of their contract negotiations that heat pumps be installed, like all of these pieces. So that would be something to look at. And yeah, action.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a pretty good, sorry, apologies for the weird screen sharing. We've got a pretty good list of things that we could do here. Maybe we wouldn't do them necessarily in this exact order, but we have a good kind of array of things that we have in our toolbox. So with this in mind, like why didn't you guys suggest maybe we just like hold signs at school pickup and do that once and then call it a day?
Because it's not going to be a one and done scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope this kind of conveys a little bit the value of a campaign. So a campaign is basically just a fancy word for it's a sequence of tactics, some of which we just brainstormed right here, which was pretty easy. It's a sequence of tactics that it has a clear goal. So in our example, the goal is we want a Green New Deal for schools, this package of heat relief and electrification and decarbonization in buildings. So it's a sequence of tactics. It has a clear goal or demand. One thing we didn't talk about in the last slide is that it should have a target. So maybe someone in the school administration is the target. We might have some secondary targets. It helps people achieve a particular change in the world. Okay, so there's a lot of things you guys told me that you were going to do here, like door-to-door canvassing with all the people in the community. We're going to also have letter writing and also have phone banking. We're going to also have a die-in. We're going to have potentially some other actions, maybe some of them getting even more disruptive. We want the teachers union on board. We've got a lot on our list here. And I see more even coming up now in the chat. And we don't have a lot of time too, because the heat wave is not breaking and people are dying in this heat wave. So how are you going to do it? How are you going to do this? All by yourself?
You have to build and gather people together, like-minded people who have different skills, and kind of figure out who can do what.
Yeah, exactly. So basically we need teams. If we want to have a campaign, we need teams of people. We can't just have one person in the center or even just two people in the center who are calling all the shots, who are coming up with all of the things and doing all the coordination and rallying everyone together and doing everything. It's too much. It's too much for one person. So we can't we can't just have one leader who's doing everything. But that doesn't mean that we don't have leaders, right? So a common kind of like hang up that you see sometimes in grassroots groups. We don't want to have just one leader, but that doesn't mean that we should have no leaders. So this is sometimes talked about the difference between having leaderless groups and leaderful groups. So having leaderful groups really helps in campaign teams. And campaign teams aren't like a typical, like business or company hierarchy with like a top-down, very rigid, centralized structure. It's distributed. There's ownership in terms of outcomes too. So maybe there's a team that's working on the canvassing. They should have ownership over how to plan the canvas schedule and the neighborhoods and where you're going. And as long as there's kind of shared strategy on the overall campaign, we don't need someone at the top dictating or micromanaging every little thing that the canvas team is doing. So that's kind of bare bones how we want to think about teams in a campaign context. Another way to think about this, which I won't go into in too much detail, is the difference between a lone wolf mobilizing and organizing. And this is something that comes from the political scientist Harry Hahn and her book, How Organizations Develop Activists. Basically, a lone wolf kind of approach to social change is what we kind of saw in this last slide of like one leader, individualized actions, maybe things like writing an op-ed, which could be valuable, but it's something that just one person can do by themselves. It's more about like sharing information and updates. Mobilizing is like a little bit more expanded than that, but it's still it still could be a kind of a centralized approach. It's focused on discrete requests that often allow people to still act alone. And it's focused on getting big groups of people out at key moments. In Harry Hahn's work, she found that mobilizing has a place in effective organizing, but on its own, not enough. What we really need is a blend of mobilizing and organizing. So organizing focuses on developing leaders who can engage other people, choosing strategies that build people's engagement over time, and that's through campaigns that sequence a series of actions that people can take towards a clear goal. It involves distributing responsibility, focusing on interdependent asks that are often more time intensive. It's not a one-off thing. It might require kind of iteration over time. It focuses on reaching out to people by building relationships and community, and it does require extensive resources for training, coaching, and reflection. And you can see the link there if you want to see more on that. But next, I'm going to ask our someone to help me here with the breakout groups, but I just wanted to take a few moments for you guys to get in just pairs and chat for a couple minutes. Have you ever been part of a campaign? Have you been a part of another different type of activist action that was not connected to a campaign? And what are some lessons or insights that you can garner from your own experience with that? So we'll see you back in 3 minutes after the breakouts are created. Okay, does anyone want to just kind of share like one takeaway or something that came up in your little breakouts? Or not, we can keep moving if you guys are all shy.
Sure. Do you want something in the chat or just out loud?
Whatever you prefer.
Well, we were just kind of getting started, Lola and I, but one of the things that that she mentioned and then I thought about is this idea of bringing in Indigenous voices at the front end of whatever organizing and mobilizing, because that ties in with the anti-racism work that we've been trying to do. And sometimes it's an afterthought. And so always trying to, because they often are at the front, the front lines of whatever we're trying to fix anyway. So I think that's just an important, I thought that was a important piece to mention.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. I don't know if anyone talked about like the example we were working with, but like a great way you could like bring that into a Green New Deals for School campaign might be like a demand for like real and honest Indigenous history and climate change education, which I know was something that was not a thing when I was in public school in Canada. Anyone else want to share anything that came up?
Saw Marianne's hand, I thought.
Yeah, I think it was also just personally, I find thinking of a campaign is very overwhelming. So maybe you're going to talk about this later on, but when I look at like low capacity and I think the solution is to have a campaign, I'm like, how do you do that with low capacity? So I typically tend to shy away from campaigns, even joining them, because I feel like there's a lot to do, which is a little ironic. So that was kind of my takeaway.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally get that. It can feel very overwhelming, especially if you're new to campaigning. Oh, I see one thing in the chat. Need to enlarge core group involved in organizing. One idea was to reach out to other groups in the city. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. So I will touch on a little bit of what has been just raised now in the chat a little bit later in the presentation. But this next thing I just kind of wanted to touch on here is that for a small grassroots group especially, it's not uncommon to have kind of a broad menu of activities that you're working on. Some of them might be, you know, one-off actions or showing up to a day of action that another organization is working on. You might have, you know, political education, a reading group, a space where you're developing your own knowledge as a team. You might be engaged in mutual aid projects, which I'm actually a big fan of mutual aid. Sometimes you hear some people kind of make a dichotomy between mutual aid and campaigns, but I think mutual aid is great because it's a team building thing. It requires lots of people. It can't really be done alone. Community service, social events, and some of these could be integrated into a campaign. And then often you might have, you know, one central campaign that you're working on alongside these other things. Campaigns often have like dips and valleys. There are sometimes periods where less is going on. So it's okay and normal to have like other things going on the side. And it's okay to be like to have some kind of spontaneity and flexibility too. A lot of us, maybe our experience with campaigns might be with more like NGO-led campaigns where things have to be like planned out in a pretty rigid way, like many years in advance for the purposes of receiving funding. Which has pros and cons to it. But if you're a small grassroots group, I would encourage you to kind of lean into the nimbleness and flexibility that's available to you in that context. I guess the last thing in this little section I wanted to say is that campaigns build power to win. So this kind of hypothetical example I gave you of the Green New Deals for School is something that actually is happening in the US on the other side of the artificial colonial border. The Sunrise Movement in the US has Green New Deals for School campaigns in various states, and many of them have now at this stage passed resolutions or won resolutions in their school districts for very similar packages to what we just described. Another example that I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit later is from a group called Cosecha, which is an immigrants' rights organization in the US that has won in the state of New Jersey driver's licenses for undocumented workers. So just to give you this example that I know it can seem really big and overwhelming, but it is possible and it feels so good when you win something because it shows you that that change is possible, that small, focused, but tangible goals are achievable. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is how and why campaigns build capacity. And I totally hear you. It sounds a little bit like an oxymoron. You're already struggling. you're already struggling with capacity, but I hope you'll hear me out here and give this a try. Campaigns build capacity because they build relationships based on shared values and stories. And they form teams of people who are committed to one another, who are accountable to one another, and who want to come back to the work day in, day out, because they have a shared purpose, a shared goal, and they have community with each other. So this diagram is a little bit artificial with this straight line. In reality, a campaign would probably look more like this. So there's going to be dips and valleys. There's going to be moments of disappointment. There's going to be moments of excitement. Maybe you get a resolution passed from the teachers union, but then the administration stalls in one way. So there's an element of kind of iterativeness, of strategizing. But what you see on the y-axis here is capacity. So the idea is that capacity increases over time. And the reason for that is that campaigns build capacity by forming teams whose number can actually expand exponentially. So we're building more teams as we go who are doing similar tactics and who are replicating similar actions in different areas, and building power, but also building capacity at the same time. Campaigns also build capacity by doing meaningful work, by developing new skills. So people feel like they're learning something, they're growing, they're meeting their own kind of human needs for being challenged, for trying new things. They're forming relationships with other people. They're finding a sense of community, which is hopefully going to keep people bonded together and working together over time, rather than having just kind of this like ebb and flow. People come, they get bored, they leave, kind of thing that is not uncommon. Don't feel bad if that has been your experience. It's been my experience in many groups too. This is a very kind of bare bones, and I realize a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you, it might seem like a lot of information. I think a lot of these could be like workshops on their own, but this is a bare bones example of what a team structure could look like. This is called the snowflake model. It comes from the Marshall Gans School of Organizing. So you'd have like a core leadership team that's in charge of like coordination. And then you have these local level leadership teams that are in charge of implementing the strategy that's kind of being overseen at a core level, but they still have autonomy and ownership to kind of be creative and implement things in their own way. And this is a way of distributing leadership, right? Some people are thinking about the bird's eye view, and some people are thinking about other parts of what's going on. So it's simple, it's scalable, it's coherent. And another thing that I would note here is that it's not about hierarchy, it's about clear distribution of domains and areas of work. So a local leadership team is just as likely to delegate something to the core leadership as the core leadership is to delegate something to the local leadership team. It could go both ways. So yeah, distributed leadership, small numbers of sustainable relationships. A magic number you might hear a lot is 7. 7 is probably the maximum number of people in a team where everyone can have a meaningful relationship with everyone on the team. The teams are interdependent and accountable. And actually, I'm going to get into the next slide a little bit more of some characteristics of teams. So, characteristics of an effective team. So the first one is that everybody knows who's on the team. I know this sounds very obvious, but how many people have been on a team where it's unclear who's even on the team because different people come every single time you meet? Put a thumbs up if that's been anyone's experience. Maybe it's just me.
Isn't that usually how it works?
Okay, yeah, so that is often, yeah, right. So the reason, yeah, so okay, I was wondering if nobody was saying anything because you've never had that experience, but it's because people have all had that experience. So it's really important to know who's on the team so that you can have some accountability. So you want to have, it's not a drop-in center. It's a it's a team that's working on a shared purpose. Of course, we all have lives and things come up, but you know, you let someone know if you can't come. And that kind of relates to this other part here on norms. So establishing norms on your team is so important. And if you don't establish norms, they kind of just emerge implicitly. And then the norm is maybe what you were just saying, though, that people can just come or not come and it doesn't matter. And that's, you know, so establishing norms is really important. And of course, it's not just going to be one person who says, oh, like we must meet every week. And if you show up 2 minutes late, you're kicked off the team. Like that's no way to do it either. But you want to have a conversation of like what is a feasible and realistic meeting schedule, and what do we do when we can't show up? Who do we let know? If X number of people can't make it, do we cancel the meeting? How do we make decisions? Things like that can sound really common or basic, but if you don't talk about them and explicitly have norms about them, people just kind of do whatever they want, and then the team kind of falls apart. So we all know who's on the team. The team remains stable for long enough to actually develop and improve strategy and work practices over time. There are clear roles too. This one's really important. Most teams have a mix of both function-based roles and life of the team roles. So a function-based role would be something like recruitment, data entry, welcomer, canvasser, trainer. It's filling out a specific function related to a project or a campaign. And then a life of the team role is something like facilitation, coordination, minute taker, recorder, logistics, things that kind of keep the team alive. And you can rotate these roles. I actually would highly encourage you to rotate them. This is maybe something you want to talk about when you talk about norms, is like, how long does someone occupy this? Is this something we swap out every time we meet? Does someone keep this for 2 or 3 months at a time? But the most important point here is that there's clarity on who occupies each role, and that everyone knows what their role is. Because then if you have a role and a responsibility and you know that it's serving a particular purpose, you're less likely to just ghost and and not show up, right? And then the last one is that the team has a compelling purpose. So by compelling purpose, I mean that it challenges members to use their highest level skills, it connects to their values, and it engages their aspirations. So we really want to be showing up as our full selves, developing ourselves as people, developing ourselves as team members, and working towards a shared and common purpose. And I could share afterwards, there are lots of like templates you can use to come up with like a purpose statement. But yeah, all of these things are really important to kind of create shared accountability towards each other. This is an example, just to kind of give this a little bit more concreteness. I mentioned briefly a couple slides ago the Cosecha's driver's license campaign in New Jersey, which was a 2-year campaign that they did win, and it since has catalyzed similar campaigns in other states. So this is an example of like how their team was structured. You can see on the left-hand side, this is how it was when they started. They just had 4 people, which is probably pretty similar to many of the people on this call, the groups you're in. And so they had 4 people and they each had a role. One person was in charge of media, one person was a coordinator, one person was the action lead, one person was doing recruitment and coaching. And then over time, these roles each developed into teams. So the recruitment role was expanded into a coaching team, and there's a team of people who are all doing coaching. The coordinator becomes this kind of central coordinating circle. Media becomes the comms team. So the middle circle here is kind of this central coordination. And in this particular example, there's actually kind of 2 coordinating circles, campaign coordination and statewide coordination. The red circles are what we would call like a function-based team, doing like, yeah, things like coaching, comms. And then in the green, these would be like turf-based teams. So as the team grew over time, Maybe they want to replicate a similar set of tactics in different boroughs or neighborhoods, different school districts. And, depending on the context of your campaign, that could look like, if it's a citywide campaign, maybe it's different neighborhoods. If it's a province-wide campaign, you'd have to figure out what is a logical geographic way to split things up. But I hope this kind of gives an example of how you can start from small and expand in terms of both the types of tasks that are required, but also the geographic distribution. Yes, I see an example. Or sorry, a question.
Thanks, Amanda. Just flagging, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I wasn't sure if there'd be, a section coming up, or if you have time to look at them.
Yeah, let me take a look at them right now. Thank you for flagging that. Okay, so I see. Okay, yeah, I've missed quite a bit here. Thanks. Oh, and I see some people have answered some of them. Thank you. Okay, so someone answered the question about mutual aid, exchange of resources, common benefit. Thank you. Yes. Okay, perfect. And then we had a question on, did we talk about a general length of time for a campaign, one like Green New Deal for schools? Yeah, so it kind of depends how long it takes to win, right? Because ideally we're in it to win it, right? We're not just here to have fun, although hopefully we do have fun, but we want to win real material change. But campaign strategies are iterative. If you're finding that something isn't working, maybe it's time to change course, try something a little bit more disruptive. I'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but I'll also flag too that this isn't a campaign planning workshop. It's a more introducing you to the flavor of campaign planning, but I will link to resources at the end where you can learn and talk more about that. Would the same people be on the core leadership team, at the local leadership team, the same people doing the work, which sometimes leads to burnout? And someone said, yeah, my understanding with this would be different people. Yeah, typically it would be different people. I have seen like in some models where there's like a link between two different teams. So there's someone who sits on a coordinating circle, and like that's what you see with this line here, this dotted line. Like maybe there's someone who's on the Trenton circle and the coordination circle. So they're the communication go-between person there. And their job is to be that link between the two. But not everyone would be in such a position. But if you find that that doesn't work for your team, you would have to have some kind of other way of communication between the two teams through a one-on-one conversation or something similar. Did I talk about what a campaign is exactly? So we talked about this briefly at the beginning. It's a sequence of tactics, sequence of actions over time with a clear goal and demand and target leading to a particular change in the world. Have I answered all of them? Yes, I think so. Okay, we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and then we'll have one final section and then maybe some time for Q&A, but let's make it a short break. Like maybe like, is 1 minute too short for a break? Does that count? 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay, do you wanna, yeah. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is just kind of the very kind of early stage of something you would have to think about if you choose to develop a campaign. Like I said, there are workshops, including workshops at the Hub, that go into all of this in much more detail. So don't feel overwhelmed, or if you do feel overwhelmed, don't feel despondent, at least. If this feels like a lot, I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of a taste of this, and then there'll be more avenues for more later. Has anyone here heard of a theory of change? Like, have you heard that term before? Yeah, I could see a few people. Okay, so a theory of change is a strategic process by which we identify a winning approach to achieving positive change and the specific milestones and tactics that are required to affect that change. So this definition here actually comes from the Ella Baker School of Organizing, but this concept is used broadly across many different organizing frameworks and schools of thought. I'm seeing a question here. Yeah, okay, maybe I'll come back to these at the end. So, and yeah, like for our purposes, a strategy is an overview of how individual steps achieve a particular goal. And the individual steps might be through like specific tactics. So a common formula for like thinking about what a theory of change is the if, then, because. So if we take this action, or if we do this specific strategy, then we will achieve this goal because of these reasons. And this is pretty simplistic. It's that you could definitely like expand on this way more, but I think this is a helpful framework, at least as a stepping stone, as a starting point, because it forces you to kind of articulate the logic behind what you're thinking about. Like if we hold up signs in the lunchroom, then the administration will implement Green New Deal for schools because they will be moved by seeing all these signs. That's a theory of change. But is it really compelling? Does our logic stack up? Do we really think they will be compelled by this? So it's a framework to just kind of start piecing this apart. Theories of change are not static though, and you're probably never going to get a perfect one in advance. If you did, then like we would have won all these things already. So don't get too caught up in like finding the perfect theory of change. You want to kind of start somewhere and be open to developing it over time as you learn more on the ground. That, you know, maybe your initial hypothesis isn't actually stacking up the way you thought it would. So to put this into context, I'm going to come back to this Cosecha example that I was talking about before. So Movimiento Cosecha, it's a national immigrants' rights organization in the United States. And this I've kind of pulled from their website, which is linked here at the bottom, paraphrasing. So this would be kind of their like overall theory of change as an organization, not for a specific campaign. But broadly, if we withhold our labor and our dollars, then we will shift the debate over whether or not this country wants immigrants to rather being a widespread understanding that it needs immigrants, which will lead to permanent protection, dignity, and respect for all 11 million undocumented people, because the economy depends on our labor and our dollars. So this is, I think, a pretty compelling theory of change. But it's also quite large and all-encompassing, and maybe a little bit hard to achieve all in one go. So that kind of brings me to the driver's license campaign. Why did they decide to focus on driver's licenses? If this was their kind of big, kind of grand scale theory of change, which I would encourage you to read more on their website, why did they decide to focus on driver's licenses? So this is a quote from a Medium article written by a member of their team, and they said, in terms of the immigrants' rights movement, which finds itself fragmented and weak, a fight for driver's licenses could be quite an opportunity to come together and build a base of older immigrant workers, a protagonist that the movement has been lacking for the last decade. And then they say, is it worth it to pass legislation if it does not build people power? The answer is no. Simply passing a legislation is not enough if we are trying to build a movement. So I've pulled out these two quotes for two reasons. The first quote, I think, actually shares a lot of similarities with the climate movement. Climate movement is also fragmented in many ways, and depending on how optimistic or pessimistic you are, you could say it's a little bit weak at the moment. But I think there's also an opportunity for kind of a different protagonist here, maybe a protagonist that people on this call see themselves in, like an older base, not only young people, and to kind of fill a void there and win something achievable that's relevant to that particular constituency. And then the second quote I pulled out is because it's not just about the legislation. It's not just about winning the driver's licenses, which of course is very important for many immigrant workers undocumented immigrants in the US. Driving without a license and then getting ticketed is the first step towards criminalization and deportation. So this is a focused, ambitious, but also targeted step that they were focusing on, but it was also about building a movement, building people power. It wasn't only about the legislative fight. It was about building the confidence and the skill set of COSECHA members and immigrants in New Jersey to win this. Skip this slide, actually. So I'm going to show you just in their own words, this campaign video that kind of explains a little bit in more detail what they did, how they won this, and what it meant for this, this campaign team.
Nuestra comunidad grita victoria. Juntos creamos un movimiento que impulsa nuestro poder popular. Fuimos nosotros los que luchamos con autodeterminación y autogestión liberadora, los que rompieron las cadenas impuestas por muchos años y los que sacaron el poder desde nuestras entrañas y ganaron las licencias de conducir juntos.
Voy a salir a Nueva York porque miedo me da manejar para allá. Ir a llevar a mis hijas a un parque donde a lo mejor no las llevo ahora, no tengo una licencia. Muchas familias van a ser beneficiadas. Esperamos contar con más apoyo de la comunidad para lo que sigue, porque seguimos más luchando por los papeles.
Ustedes saben muy bien que una licencia de conducir para nosotros no es una necesidad.
Todos los años podemos decir que en Nueva Jersey hay un cambio de tiempo, donde nuestra comunidad documentada no tiene miedo, ha salido a las calles y ha demostrado su poder. Decimos que esta victoria se la ganó el pueblo y nadie se la ha regalado. Este sistema político que por más de 18 años le había negado esta justicia a nuestra comunidad, por fin ha entendido que nuestra comunidad no se va a quedar callada.
A través de los años de la historia nos hemos dado cuenta siempre que muchas de las veces estos políticos lo único que saben hacer es tratar de sacar provecho de nuestras comunidades. Nosotros somos los que tenemos que liderar esos movimientos, esas luchas.
Nobody's asking for promises anymore. We want those licenses.
Nosotros somos los que sentimos el miedo a manejar sin una licencia. Nosotros somos los que llevamos a nuestros hijos en el frío, en la nieve, en la lluvia. Nosotros somos los que padecemos el día a día no tener una licencia. A mí me lo dijeron muchas veces, ¿qué haces tú luchando? No vas a ganar nada, eres mexicana, vete a tu país, me decían. Mas, sin embargo, nosotros siempre mantuvimos la fe, ¿no? Pues sí, quiero decirles que no paren, que sigan luchando, que cuando las cosas se hacen con amor y con fe, las cosas se logran.
El pueblo vive, la lucha sigue.
So pause that there and go back to oops. Any reactions? How did that video make you feel? Anyone want to chime in?
Heartwarming. It was great.
Anything else? I feel the urgency too. When I watch this video, as something that I didn't really know anything about until I, just did a little bit of research on it for this presentation, I'm suddenly now very invested in driver's licenses, which I did not know anything about before. But that's kind of sorry, in this context of undocumented immigrants, I should specify, but that's the power of a campaign, right? It tells a compelling story, it builds a base of people, it creates urgency, which I think is something we sometimes struggle with in the climate movement because it can feel so big and abstract. But that's why I wanted to open with our hypothetical example at the beginning of sometimes you need to create the urgency or bring it together through a story, right? Like people are dying in a heat wave. And that's why we need this action now, not, 6, 8, 10 months from now. And maybe it will take that long, but if you expect it to take that long, it's going to take double that. But yeah, a key takeaway I would say from this example is that the driver's license campaign was not everything that Cosecha wanted, not even close. The situation of immigrant communities in the US and in Canada is still very dire, but it was a small, focused, manageable, yet ambitious campaign on an issue that is deeply and widely felt. And it helped build the power and the capacity of Cosecha chapters in New Jersey and eventually across the US, because it inspired and catalyzed other chapters in different states to launch their own fights for driver's licenses. And in the words of Cosecha, licenses today, permanent protection tomorrow. It's part of a larger vision. It's one campaign, but there's a bigger, la lucha sigue, right? The struggle continues. Like I said, we could do a whole workshop just on theory of change, and theory of change is not the end-all be-all of campaigns. It's just one small piece of it. Here's some more resources about how to develop a theory of change. But also, if after this workshop you feel like campaigns are something that you might want to try, I know a lot of you were skeptical at the beginning, so I don't know how many of you I want to run over, maybe not everyone. The Hub does have a campaign incubator program called Groundswell. We launched our first iteration of Groundswell last winter, and we'll have another round coming up in the fall. So this is a 7-week course that's designed to equip participants with tools and instincts that you need to design, deploy, and assess a campaign for maximum impact. It covers way more than what I could cover in an hour and a half here. And yeah, keep an eye out for the Hub's newsletter, for social media. There is an application process. Last time we had way more applicants than we could take. But yeah, if that's something that y'all are interested in, I would be really happy to talk about it more. But in the meantime, if you're looking for something from the Hub this summer, we also have a extreme weather events microgrants program, and the application closes. I should have put this on the slide because I don't remember. I think it closes like in August.
August 16th.
Thank you. Someone knows. Okay. Do you work for the Hub as well? No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so we have small grants to support organizers to execute either mutual aid or grassroots actions that connect to extreme weather events across so-called Canada this summer. It's between $500 and $2,000, and that's the link to the application form. Yeah, and I think I'll end there. I don't know if we want to keep this section in the recording or maybe end the recording and just chat more informally. Either way is fine.